But we're going to get started here really quick with research compliance checklist and export research security. A very fun and important topic. And we have Nancy Henderson from Arizona State University, who's the head of research compliance in their Office of Research Integrity and Insurance. And Cliffton Fredericks.
Yes.
I believe is at the University of Arizona, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry. I'm at the ASU.
ASU, I'm sorry. And so most of this is on Zoom. We do have some people participating here locally, but they all are on computers if possible. If it's possible. We don't have that on screen, right, Lucas? No. But anyway, we do want to acknowledge our land acknowledgement.
There it is.
Yep, take time to review that. Again, we're grateful and proud to be able to participate on these sacred lands throughout Arizona. And with that, I will let the presenters take over and we'll go from there.
Awesome. So first of all, can you hear me and can you see the slides? Yep. All right.
Yep.
So Cliff and I, first of all, we know you all had a choice. This is the end of the day toward the, the last session of the conference, and we know you had a choice of sessions to pick. And we're absolutely thrilled that you picked our session today to learn a little bit more about research compliance and export and research security. Cliff and I, as Chris mentioned, we're both from Arizona State University. So kind of the perspective that we're going to share with you is the ASU, what we're doing here at ASU. I'm speaking for Cliff as well as myself, that we would love to know what, our fellow colleagues here on the Zoom from NAU and U of A are doing in this arena. We're all in this together, and obviously research compliance and research security, which is extremely big topic right now. Any feedback that you share with us, we don't know the answer. We're going to go find the answer. We're looking at trying to see if we can get more resources available out for folks on these types of topics. So at the end, we'll have time for any questions and feedback and comments, and then we will obviously be available via email and everything after the session. If you think of something tomorrow or next week or next month or whatever, we're here to we would love to talk with you and find out what you're doing or what you're encountering to see if we can kind of work in this arena better, smarter, faster, more efficient, right? So with that, let me just roll right in. I'm going to start first, and then I'm going to turn it over to Cliff. Cliff is an export control officer, and so he will take the export research security side of this presentation. So very briefly for the whole community here, just what is the role of research compliance for what we do every day. Primarily, you can see the three balls. It's not only to protect the participants of the research, it's also to protect our universities and our researchers. And it's also to ensure that we are meeting local, state, federal regulations and that our researchers are conducting research in an ethical and responsible manner. I mean, at the end of the day, that is our charge in research compliance, is to make sure that ethical and responsible research is being conducted and the rules are being followed. And I will, speaking for the compliance team here at ASU, it's not always an easy job. But it is something that we, take very seriously, and we want to make sure that we're a really great resource, not only for researchers, but also the whole research administration community, because we rely on you, RAs, to support us in this mission to ensure ethical and responsible conduct of research. So some research compliance areas, and you probably are all a little bit familiar with this, but from a research compliance organization perspective, these are probably the main areas that we focus on. And I have another slide, so there's more. But this, in addition to human subjects research, there's also research that involves biological materials, recombinant synthetic DNA. If it involves animals, conflicts of interest, that's a research compliance area. And there was the session this morning on conflicts of interest where this was touched on in more depth for sure than I'm going to touch on today. But from the COI perspective, it is ensuring that there are no situations in the conduct of research that prevents free and unbiased inquiry. There's also the responsible conduct of research program. If you are getting funding from the National Science Foundation, from the PHS organizations, training and responsible conduct of research is important. There's also scientific diving. That is related to OSHA requirements to make sure that if there is research involving diving, that it is done in a safe manner. And then obviously, last but not least, research security and export controls, which Cliff will touch on. And that is making sure that all the government requirements regarding the transfers of technology, the export of technology, does not violate any of those regulations or impact national security. Okay. One of the big things that in a research compliance organization that you all I'm sure have heard of, been involved in, maybe helped your researcher prepare documentation for, is having to take their research protocols to compliance committees. So here at ASU, and I'm sure at U of A and NAU, you have these committees. If you're doing human subjects research by federal regulation, you have to have an institutional review board. Animal research requires an institutional animal care and use committee. If you're working with biological materials, recombinant synthetic DNA, etc., an institutional biosafety committee. And I wanted to just kind of give you just a little bit of a flavor of what these committees do. Researchers that are conducting research in these particular areas, they want to have human subjects or animals or so on. There are strict requirements to submit their protocols. Their protocols are reviewed by experts who are on these boards and committees, as well as others in the organization to ensure that the human subjects are protected, animals are protected, safe use of biological or recombinant or synthetic DNA, viruses, bacteria, very big during COVID time, research involving the SARS-CoV-2 virus as an example, making sure that there's safe research being conducted in those regards. And it is a regulated process. For researchers cannot conduct research involving human subjects research unless they have the appropriate institutional review board approvals in place. If they want to modify their protocols, they have to get the proper approvals as well. So it is you can see the circle. The circle goes around a lot of times when you're talking about research compliance that may involve these elements. In addition to that, related to conflict of interest and protection of intellectual property, ASU's got an intellectual property and institutional review committee, And they meet and discuss and review policies related to disclosures of financial interests that may impact university research. All right, so very quickly, I have a lot of slides here, so I'm not going to touch on every element, but I did want to give you a flavor, especially if you may be new to the RA business, and you probably maybe heard some of these IRBs or IACUCs or IVCs or IPRCs, or you may have heard some of these buzz terms and you know, from your researchers, and you're not totally sure what that means. I would just want to give you a basic flavor. So human subjects research in a nutshell, research generally speaking, the definition is here and the keywords are in red. It's systematic. It is designed to contribute to generalizable knowledge. Those are really keys. That's the definition of research. When you throw the human subject element in there, it is when it involves a living individual, obtaining data either through some type of an intervention or some type of interaction and with that individual, or some information about that individual. So it could be human subjects research could be anything from I want to do a survey of research of all the research administrators at Arizona State University, U of A, and NAU. And I want to send them a survey to get their thoughts on the research administration profession because I'm studying that. And then they want to publish the results of that research out in the community, okay? So human subjects research is governed by the federal regulations and as well as institutional policies. So I know all three of our institutions have policies on human subjects research, and they talk to the need to have an institutional review board convened in order to be able to ensure that human subjects research protocols and studies are approved. So just a couple other little things about the IRB and what type of research protocols they would look at. The regulations really guide on the type of human subjects research that can be conducted. Here at ASU, we actually have two institutional review boards, one for bioscience related research and one for social behavioral type of research. So you could probably put it into buckets that says bioscience is more medical health related, social behavioral obviously not medical related. Like the research administration survey would probably be in the social behavioral area. Some sponsors, and this for all the RAs on our session today, you may have heard of a just-in-time letter. This is something that the sponsors may from time to time go to your researcher and ask them for some type of an approval from the institutional review board before they'll provide you funding. They'll provide funding for the research. A just-in-time letter is something that the IRB can provide, and it essentially signifies to the sponsor that all the approvals required for human subjects research will be in place before those funds are spent. And that is, again, hopping to the next point, that's the key, that human subjects research cannot be conducted until those approvals are in place, as well as changes have to be approved as well. So research, the last bullet on here about ABOR policy 1-118 tribal consultation, that is related to Native American cultural review. All three of us, that ABOR policy applies to all three of us, all three of our institutions. And we at ASU have additional policy in addition to the ABOR policy for tribal cultural review, tribal consultation. We work with our Native American organization here, as well as I'm sure that you do at your schools as well. So on human subjects research, I would absolutely tell you, reach out to your IRB administration folks. Ever you have a question, or if your researcher is coming to you with a question, like I need to have something for IRB, just reach out to them and they will be there to help you with this. Okay. Let me hop to animal research real quick. Animal research is highly regulated. There's the Animal Welfare Act, as well as the Public Health Service policy for the conduct of animal research. You can tell here cephalopods, they're even part of animal research, and there's special accreditations required that your animal research program can receive. The Institutional Animal Use and Care Committee is a committee that meets, that approves the conduct of animal research. They can also do a just-in-time letter, and it's also critical that researchers that may be conducting research involving animals have that IACUC approval before they expend any funds on that type of research. There are extreme training requirements, as well as occupational health and safety requirements related to researchers working with animals. And again, if your researchers are going to be doing research involving animals, then please reach out to your IACUC administration folks for more information about your specifics related to your university. The red statement is the biggest deal. It is truly a privilege, and it is not a right to work with animals. In the research compliance business, animal research, it always comes down to, in my opinion, because I'm an animal lover, I love animals, right? And I do know that this research is vital, but animals don't have a voice. And that is the IACUC's role, is to make sure that they're a voice to be able to protect and care for the animals. So your IACUC people, your veterinary staff, they are very much there to ensure that the research involving animals is safely conducted with minimal harm to animals. Biological research, okay. So this has been obviously, since the last 3 or 4 years with COVID, there's been a lot of stuff in the news about research involving biological materials and viruses. You can tell that the type of things that biohazards include, as well as recombinant synthetic nucleic acids, DNA, RNA, so on, human and non-human primate blood, tissue, human cells, microorganisms, select agents and toxins, transgenic animals, plants, insects. So this is a huge sweeping area of research. It is governed by the National Institutes of Health Guidelines for Research Involving Recombinant Synthetic Nucleic Acids, big mouthful, as well as institutional policies. Again, this is an area that is very highly regulated. The Institutional Biosafety Committee has to review protocols involving biohazardous materials prior to the use of those materials. Obviously, the more risky research project involving these types of materials may be, the shorter that the Institutional Biosafety Committee may say the researcher can work without coming back and getting additional reviews. I would recommend highly, if this comes up in research that you're supporting for your researchers, talk to your Institutional Biosafety Committee administration folks for more information. And safety, obviously, when you're talking with biohazardous materials, safety is the most of utmost concern, not only for the people conducting research, for animals that may be involved in it, as well as the environment. You never want to have a lab accident or something serious happen. The Institutional Biosafety Committee works very closely with environment and health and safety to ensure that this type of research is done in as safe a manner as humanly possible. So conflict of interest. Conflict of interest, this, as I mentioned before, there was the session this morning related to conflict of interest. So I'm not going to go into any of the details that they imparted this morning. It was a great session. I was a part of it and listened. But I did want to point out in regards to research compliance that conflict of interest when it comes to research is an important aspect, not only because there's federal regulations related to conflict of interest, but us being part of ABOR, state of Arizona, ABOR has a conflict of interest policy as well that all of us must comply with. So if you've never gone out and read ABOR 3-901, go give it a quick little read. But in essence, as employees of the state of Arizona under the ABOR, under the Arizona Board of Regents, we have an obligation to make sure that what we do does not present a conflict and to disclose as appropriate to our university officials if we need to. Substantial interest is the key term. And I'm going to just read it. Substantial interest refers to quantity. Substantial interest is any pecuniary or money or proprietary ownership interest, direct or indirect, other than a remote interest. There's a lot more in that ABOR policy, and I'm sure that your own institutional policies have probably touched on it and provided more information, as have ASU's. But I would say that from a research administration perspective, it is something that I would advise RAs to kind of keep an eye on. I know our researchers are involved in, have startup companies, and they may approach you about wanting to be, support their startup companies. It's kind of some things you need to think of, because if you are supporting that may be an interest that you need to disclose and ensure that it does not conflict with your ASU responsibilities. So this is the state requirements for conflict of interest related to research. When it relates to research, it is whether the individual researcher as well as their spouse or dependent children may have a financial interest that could affect the keywords design, conduct, reporting, purpose, or funding of research. So the NSF, Public Health Service, DOE, they all have policies out there. NASA's got a policy. They all have policies out there related to conflict of interest that has a requirement for disclosure of significant financial interests. And again, for disclosure, it is individuals that are involved in the design, conduct, reporting, purpose, or funding of research. So typically that will be the principal investigator, a co-I, so on. It generally would not be a research administration person, but generally speaking, it would be those individuals that would be doing disclosures related to any significant financial interests. Again, significant financial interest has a really specific definition in it, and it does refer to money, IP rights, ownership in businesses, stocks, so on. There are specific things. The NSF, PAPPG's policy defines significant financial interests, and disclosure obviously is going to be per your institutional policies and procedures. We here at ASU, we have the Enterprise Research Administration Conflict of Interest module, and so our researchers disclose via that module. We manage it through the electronic system with review. And you may have a similar system at your university as well. The key here from a research administrator perspective is that encourage your researchers to disclose and update disclosures at proposal submission, because those are something they have to certify that they have accurately and updated their disclosures. There's also requirements to report changes of any disclosures, new disclosures or revised disclosures within 30 days of the change. So from a research administration perspective, while you don't do these disclosures for your researchers or PIs, they do this. If they come to you with questions about conflict of interest, encourage them to disclose. Because if they don't disclose, the penalties could be severe. It's always better to disclose. I think I heard that this morning. So, and always reach out to your COI administration folks and for more information about disclosure. This slide, I'm not going to spend time on it, but I just wanted to give you the breadth of the COI policies out there. There's a lot. So this obviously is a big area within federal grants administration as well as for the state of Arizona. RCR, Responsible Conduct of Research. This is an ethics training program. This is required by federal sponsors to have an RCR program. I'll be honest, I'm not up to speed on NAU or U of A, how they manage their RCR program. I think maybe I need to go out there and take a little look because ours is available, ASU's is available. So by all means, y'all feel free to go out and take a look at our website for our RCR program. Essentially, it is a requirement for training for undergrads, graduate students, postdocs, and very recently NSF-funded investigators when they are working on research to have responsible conduct of research training. The topics that are mentioned here are called out in the federal regulation about these are the topics that they would like to see responsible conduct of research training provided on. We utilize here at ASU the city platform, city training for our undergrad and graduate and postdoc training. And we call it phase 1. So it's a series of city provided training modules to ensure that we're meeting that training requirement. We also have utilized city and city modules and put together a training for NSF funded investigators. And again, that requirement became effective as of the 31st of July of last year for NSF investigators to receive RCR training before it was prior undergrad, graduate, and postdocs. So if anybody's interested in getting a flavor for how we implemented that requirement, we're happy to share. So reach out to us on that. In addition to the training for undergraduates and graduate students and postdocs, we also do a phase 2 type of training, which is for postdoc students, although it's open to the entire ASU community with the workshops. So we typically hold 4 workshops a semester that are open to the community. We have individuals researchers from ASU. They primarily present because we want to have the researchers present to their junior researchers because it's more real world. And so we have them participate in that. And then we also ask our PIs to, continue education with their junior researchers, postdocs, undergrads. So that's the RCR program. Again, it is a federal requirement to have an RCR program. Scientific diving, real quick. Scientific diving is a requirement for having a safety program if you will be diving, if researchers will be diving for a scientific or research or educational activity. So it's different than commercial diving. Like I have to chuckle, pipelines, construction, demolition, underwater cables, so on. That's different than scientific diving. And in the OSHA regulation, Occupational Health and Safety Administration regulations, there is a carve out specifically for this type of diving, which mandates that you're not subject to all the OSHA regulations if you establish a diving control board and have all these elements in place. So I'm touching on that. We do have here at ASU, we do have We do have some scientific diving. It's primarily in Bermuda and Hawaii. And so we do have dive safety officers that support these activities. So it's a research compliance item that is maybe you don't see it very often, but when it comes up, it's one of those ones that you're like, oh, I need to make sure that we've got this one covered. Just a little bit more about scientific diving. We do have a policy at ASU for this that talks about underwater diving for research, and we are a member of the American Academy of Underwater Sciences, which is the guidance, the certification requirements that ASU utilizes for scientific diving. So if you have that, if you have scientific diving in your university, I continue to keep looking at this area and what's a good way to manage it. So if you give me a shout out separately and let me know what you're doing, I would love to know, because this doesn't come up very often, but it is something that we want to always make sure that from a compliance perspective, we've got our researchers in a good stead in this regard. So I think with that, how am I doing on time? I think I'm okay with that. I'm going to turn it over to Cliff Fredericks. He's going to give you the story on research security, export control, and international research.
All right, thanks very much, Nancy. And as Nancy said, thanks to everyone who attended this session. I know you guys had other items you could review, and it is late in the day on end of a 2-day seminar, so we do appreciate your attention to this. So I'll start real quick on the international research and research security and export controls. Basically, this used to be run under ORIA, and it's become such a big deal lately that we have broken off into a separate group and started another organization to make sure we control all the things that have come up lately. So this chart will identify some of the foreign components that we look at when reviewing items related to international research. And as like I said, you'll see a lot of things that Nancy has already referenced. We do look at things like conflict of commitment, restricted party screenings. We make sure there's no sanctions against countries or individuals that may be on a list that we should not be doing business with. Of course, export controls, which I'll get into a little bit later, and sponsor disclosures and specific sponsor requirements. We work closely with the PNT group whenever certain clauses come into effect as far as non-US citizens or export controls. So we'll make sure we review those and make sure we're compliant. Some of the other things we do is visiting scholars. ASU is very international. We have a lot of scholars from other countries come to join us and work with us. And again, we have to screen and make sure that they're coming from a party that's not on the denied parties list. We review what sort of information they're going to work with and just make sure there's no issues coming to ASU and spending some time here. Also, we work with a conflict of interest in research. Like I said, Nancy mentioned this a little bit earlier. There's a little bit of overlap. We try to help them make sure that if there is any conflict, we'll dig into it a little bit deeper and make sure that there's it's okay for what's been disclosed and that we can move forward with it. And actually, in one of my slides later on, we'll discuss a little bit more. But again, this is a whole nother session. Plus, Nancy touched on it, so I'll keep it pretty short and sweet. All right, next, please. All right, so we'll start off with research security. I'm just going to go and read this off and just give you a flavor of where we're at. Over the past years, higher education has experienced increased activity and scrutiny related to issues of foreign influence in academia. A lot of federal agencies have issued new requirements and guidance, and Congress actually signed new legislations that now tells us how we have to perform internationally. So again, this is why the group that I work for is formed recently. This is kind of a big change. There were always export controls in place, but now due to the many changes in regulations and laws, we need a group that'll concentrate just on that alone. The federal government has placed a burden on universities to take measure to strengthen protections on U.S. supported research and development against foreign government interferences and exploitations. Basically, the university system has been decentralized and resulting in challenges when developing and implementing compliance programs and coordinating operations and representing the institutional perspective. So this is why NSPM 33 came to be. NSPM 33 is an executive directive that intends to safeguard the security and integrity of federally funded research, which I know all of our universities take part in. It is implemented when your university or institution has been funded from the government over $50 million in research. And if it does, then you have to take part of this program and make sure that security training is in place and a program's in place to help secure all international collaborations. Next slide, please. So what's the solution? Like I mentioned earlier, we created a team of individuals that are authorized to centralize institutional research compliant activities, which enable the focus to focus on compliance and reduce the faculty time on administrative tasks. So rather than have the RA or their PI start doing research to see if they're compliant with what they're doing, they can just send the information to us. And us, we are now called Institutional Compliance and Regulatory Affairs, they're known as ICRA team, which again was created about 1 year ago, just so we can address these new issues. The team basically consists of Deb Murphy, Gavin Emerson, and myself. And we also get some support from Maria Gibbons and Jonathan Poole. They're in the PNT group, but when we need their help, we reach out to them and they help us with the export stuff. And also when we have issues on contractual language, we reach out to them to make sure we agree that we're all understanding the language in the same way. So some of the things that we provide support in, like I mentioned a little bit earlier on the first slide, export control, whenever we have to transfer technologies to a foreign partner or work with a foreign partner, we have to review many different issues to make sure there's no conflicts there. Again, research security, we want to make sure the research we have is secure and doesn't get in the hands of people we don't want it to get into. Again, Nancy touched on misconduct in research, and that was kind of, we do touch base on that a little bit. Again, work closely with the RIA. Foreign influence is a large area of interest of us right now. We're trying to perform different webinars and training in regards to how to work with foreign entities. And it's a big part, again, with ASU because we are very international. We also provide institutional certifications. Many governmental federal agencies, when they send us a proposal or an award, they want certain certifications that ASU will abide by certain laws and regulations. And many of those come through our office. We'll read them, make sure we have everything in place to adhere to them and sign them and let them be part of the award or proposal. And then we also do responsible conduct and research, again, to kind of touch bases with the misconduct in research. Again, these are all items that we will review to ensure that the research will not be compromised and ASU export control regulations will be adhered to. Try to keep everyone out of jail is really our main goal. Next slide, please. So our responsibilities as employees of public institutions, first and foremost, we're public universities and we're all public servants. Everything we do is potentially discoverable and it's something the government agencies and law enforcement can subpoena. So just because you may have sent a text to somebody or a telephone call, those are things that the government or the law enforcement agencies can look at if it's part of their investigation. Includes travel records, emails, financial interactions, like I mentioned, texts, telephone calls, any transactions, particularly when you're working with an international partner. So the best we can do, as Nancy said, and part of the COI, best thing we can do is to make sure we're never in any danger of having our actions misinterpreted and to completely disclose all interactions we have or intend to have with international organizations. To sum it up, kind of like Nancy said, openness and transparency are key. If you're going to work with a foreign entity or foreign partner, please let us know in advance. Again, we'll vet them, make sure there's no background that may not be someone or something we want to deal with at ASU and that everything's okay to work with. Next slide, please. So export controls and research security, a lot of you may be wondering what exactly is export controls. In essence, the objective is to protect U.S. national security and foreign interests by preventing terrorism, restricting exports of goods and technologies that may contribute to the potential of foreign adversaries, and protecting the loss of goods and key technologies that could affect the U.S. economy. This is key to all three universities because we produce a lot of new technology and it's very important to the U.S. economy and the economy of the institutions. And we want to make sure that it doesn't get into the wrong hands because I know many times PIs like to share their information and sometimes we have to reel them back a little bit and say, well, you can't do that. Before you go too far, you can tell them this, but maybe not that. Or perhaps talk to this person, but not that person. And again, we're just trying to protect ASU and the PI and national technologies. Next slide, please. So what is an export? An export under the regulations is any shipment, transmission, or of a controlled physical item, information, or software, or technical data to a foreign person in the U.S. or abroad without an export license or exemption. So again, one of the things we do when the PI is working internationally, we have to make sure there's no controls on the particular technology they're working on. And there's various categories we have to look through and sanctions, and I'll discuss that in a little bit later slide. But again, we have to make sure if we are sharing technologies with a foreign entity that everything is placed before we do that. So again, it could include, like I mentioned earlier, via phone, via fax, email, or even a conversation can be considered an export to the home of a country of a foreign person. Just by sharing that information, it could be considered an export. Next slide, please. So some of the export control laws are basically governed by three principal sets of regulations. The U.S. Department of Commerce, they control the Export Administration Regulations, better known as EAR. This is for dual-use technology. It can be civilian or military. Most items we do at ASU fall under EAR. Occasionally, we do have to go to ITAR, which I'll explain later, but most of the items we do, we will review the EAR regulations and check those. The next one is the U.S. Department of Treasury. It's the Office of Foreign Assets Control, better known as OFAC. They enforce economic and trade sanctions based on U.S. policies. So again, we may want to go to a particular country, share a certain type of information, and we'll have to review that country, make sure there's no sanctions against that type of technology we want to share. So it's not just the people, sometimes it's the country we have to be aware of and things we need to look out for. The final one is the U.S. Department of State. That's ITAR, International Traffic in Arms Regulations. It deals with military technologies. And although we do a lot of work with DARPA and DOD and the Air Force, it's pretty rare we have any ITAR issues. Most of the research we do is considered fundamental. So the export laws aren't in effect if we do get determination from the federal sponsor that's fundamental research. So we do look at ITAR requirements and regulations, but it's rare that they affect the work we do at ASU. Next slide, please. So export control and tri-university researchers. Again, we have to emphasize we're public universities and we're public servants, so everything we do is out in the open. Most of the research we do between the three universities is fundamental in nature, like I already mentioned, so there are no export controls. However, when there are export controls, they can apply to both funded and unfunded research. This was an issue that a lot of PIs didn't understand. They thought only federally funded items were controlled for export, and that's not the case. Anything can have export controls, whether it's federally funded through an industry or some other type of funding. There could still be export controls dependent upon the technology. So again, the application of export controls is specific to the project. So the PI can be working on a number of different projects, and only one particular technology may have that export control that we have to work with. Export controls are the law of the land, and we have to ensure that we can demonstrate due diligence in protecting what needs to be protected. Again, that was the whole purpose of creating the organization I'm in. We want to make sure that we protect ASU, we protect the PIs, and we protect the technology. So we do take this, and we are planning many training sessions because we're trying to get the word out to the PIs and RAs and everyone involved that this is something they have to be aware of and make sure that if they have any questions to contact us. So consequences of noncompliance, as Nancy's also stated, noncompliance with export controls, laws and regulations can be very severe. There's criminal and civil penalties, prison time, and monetary fines. Next slide, please. So changing times, again, this is all relatively new. This slide represents a chronological view of the more prominent news headlines regarding export controls and research security. So I will just touch base on briefly to give you an idea on how things have changed. So the first item, August 2018, NIH, they issue a letter to grantees on foreign influence concerns. This is the first time that some of the larger federal sponsors have come back and said, you know, we're a little worried about who your people are working with in regards to foreign entities. So that was the first notice that people really started paying attention. Then about a year later, March 2019, the DoD issued a memo, and it was directly in regards to protection of intellectual property. Again, they're noticing that we're losing intellectual property to foreign entities, and they want to make sure that we are aware of it and started to figure out a way for us to better protect it. So then in July 2020, NSF, they update their disclosures requirement. They're a little bit more stringent. And like Nancy said earlier, disclose. And then just 1 month later, they shared the first details of the foreign influence investigations. They want to make sure people read their letters and understand what they're looking for, and that they will start investigations to make sure that everyone is adhering to their requirements. So I mentioned earlier, NSPM 33, that came out in January 2021. It was posted for strengthening research security, as I mentioned. A little bit later that year in May 2021, NIH had a conflict of interest disclosure requirements is updated, much more stringent. So as time goes by, they're really trying to put the clamps on how we transfer technologies and information to foreign entities. So a couple items in the news, a little bit more recent. November 2022, Ohio State University pays $875,000 to resolve allegations of failure to disclose professors' foreign government support. A year later, it's very similar. University of Oklahoma professor and his wife, they're sentenced for federal grant fraud. Again, the allegations were he was being funded from a foreign government, and he did not disclose that. So as Nancy said, not only the PI himself, but his wife got involved. So it is not only just the PI, but sometimes people around them that can be affected by this. The most current one is pretty eye-opening. It's October of 2023. Stanford University agreed to pay $1.9 million to the DOJ to resolve allegations of failure to disclose foreign research support in federal proposals. So these are just a few of the examples that show how the federal agencies are really starting to enforce laws and check up on institutions and PIs to make sure that there's no laws being broken. Next slide, please. So best practices. So again, most of this is taken from our ASU perspective. So you will have to see that a lot of these links, and on the next slide, there are also references, are all around ASU. But again, I'm going to say ensure reporting of all external funding relationships with foreign entities is disclosed to both the sponsors and to ASU. Includes financial interest in any foreign entities. Again, we have, in this case, contact Nancy's group, ORIA. However, be sure to contact whichever institutional organization handles that at your institution. Again, I'm not sure how NAU or U of A handles things, so I apologize for that. Again, any appointments or positions at other institutions inside or outside the US need to be disclosed. And a lot of PIs, they do peer reviews, they have honorariums, speaking engagements, and a lot of foreign co-authors. All of these need to be disclosed, and most of the time will have to be approved. So again, if you have any questions, you can contact the Export Control Office. We'll vet those institutions and entities and make sure there's no issues. And if there is, then we'll work it out and make sure we disclose it and discuss why you're doing it and what we need to do in the future if it is a problem. Most of the time, it's at the time of proposal development. We try to include descriptions of foreign collaborators. We review the funding announcements and see if there's any disclosure information. As I stated earlier, a lot of the federal sponsors are now including very strict language as far as disclosures and or working with non-US citizens. We have to make sure that the PI is aware of that. And many times, especially with the DOE particularly, if you do have a foreign person working on your project, they have to be approved by the sponsor before they can begin working on the project. So that's rather new, but we are seeing more and more DOE contracts, and we've actually seen it on a couple of AFRL contracts where they were very specific that they wanted US persons only, or that any foreign persons would have needed their approval before they're allowed to work on the project. So again, going back to Nancy, she reports all conflicts of interest. We do have a special portal in our electronic system to do that, so we keep track of that. Again, if you have some type of system, put it in the system, make sure everyone's aware of it. And that way, if there's an investigation, we can better justify what's going on. And last, we need to ensure agreements are in place for MTAs, material transfers, data sharing, or sharing of confidential information. We got to make sure the agreements are in place stating what we expect and how we're going to handle things. So it's important if we are working with a foreign entity, the needed agreements are in place before we move forward with things. Next slide, please. Like I mentioned earlier, here's some of the resources we use. These are all associated with ASU. So they're great sources of information. If you have any questions, feel free to jump on these websites with these links. And if you have more questions, the first one you go to the export.control@asu.edu. Send us an email. We'll be more than happy to help you through and answer any questions for you. The next link is just about export controls and security. Again, just a lot of information I covered here. And all of these links do have an FAQ section. So hopefully if there's something that you don't see, you can go to the FAQs and they'll answer your questions. Another link we use all the time is export controls and securities. It's the regulations and resources. The last one is getting more attention is the international collaboration and engagement. Again, it actually breaks it down by different federal sponsors and what the requirements are and what they expect as far as disclosing items like that. So again, if you have any questions, I know we had a lot to say here and it's all about ASU. So I'm not sure how various institutions run their programs, but you can always contact either myself or Nancy. And I'll be more than happy to answer any more questions. So last slide, Nancy.
So I'm just, I threw this in at the back. This is our contact information here at ASU, Office of Research Integrity and Assurance. If you go to our website, researchintegrity.asu.edu, we've got all the tabs. You can take a look at everything that we have in regards to compliance, export controls that Cliff just discussed is a part of this. So this information is all available to you. Again, I encourage you know, my fellow colleagues here at NAU and U of A. There's a lot of things that are happening in the research compliance space. It seems like it's constant. And we would love to collaborate with you. What are you doing? What are you having challenges with? And vice versa, what we're having challenges with. For all the research administrators, I would foot stomp, please reach out to your compliance folks. We are here to help your researchers, but at the end of the day, we know your researchers come to you and ask you a lot of questions because they're super busy. And you having that little bit of nugget of knowledge related to research compliance, when your researcher asks you something, there might be something in there that says, oh, wait a minute, let me go talk to the compliance folks. I want to make sure that that our research is conducted ethically, right, responsibly, right, legally, right, and that's what we're here for. Sometimes research compliance is a tough job. Sometimes we have to say no, but we always try to analyze every situation as it comes along to make sure that we can, you know, that the reputations of our universities are intact and, you know, we're protecting the subjects that we need to protect. So this is our contact information. As Cliff mentioned, you know, reach out to us at any time. We're here. And then I'm going to move to the next one, which I think is the question slide. So we have a couple minutes, right?
Yep, we have until 3:45, so plenty of time for questions.
Okay, so did anybody have any questions for us? No?
It's the end of the day. Everyone's tired.
I know that's the challenge with being at the end of the day.
And just to reiterate, this information will be available to everybody a couple weeks after TURAC. So again, if questions arise later on, the information is there for you. So it's okay if there's crickets for now.
Absolutely. Again, if anybody thinks of something after this presentation or tomorrow or Friday or next week, we're available here. Just always feel free to reach out to us.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm gonna put the next one up there because I want to make sure people see this, right?
Great. Thank you, Cliff and Nancy. We really appreciate it. Some really good information for us all in research administration offices throughout the state of Arizona. Please don't forget to take your Turex surveys. Chance to win a $25 gift card. I know everybody could use it. I know I could. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Appreciate
Yep.
it.
Thank you, everybody. Take
Thank you.
care.